What do you think happens when you humiliate the wrong man in front of 200 people? Turns out that man had been carrying a secret for 15 years, one that could unravel a career in 40 minutes. Hold on, because this is not a pretty love story with roses and a string quartet at the end. This is about pride, about what pride costs, and about a father who had nothing left to lose because he had already lost the one thing that mattered most. I found this footage buried in an old university forum out of Chicago. No monetization, no editing, uploaded by someone who filmed the whole thing from the third floor of a lecture hall. And once I watched it start to finish, I understood exactly why nobody dared post it publicly until much later. Because what happened in that room does not fit into 15 seconds of video. His name was Daniel Cole. And this is the story of how a man earning minimum wage taught a lesson in mathematics and in humility to the most brilliant woman in the entire state of Illinois. Stay until the end, because the turn this story takes is not what you expect, and I promise you'll want to send it to someone who has ever felt like they weren't enough. Kingsley University was not just any school. The children of state senators studied there, the nephews of real estate developers, the granddaughters of families with their names on downtown buildings. Marble hallways, gardens trimmed with a ruler, and a mathematics department that landed in the national top 5 nearly every year. Daniel Cole worked there as the night security guard. He clocked in at 9, clocked out at 5 in the morning, always in the same navy blue uniform, carrying the same flashlight that barely worked anymore from overuse. He walked the halls, checked that the doors were locked, switched off the lights students left burning. And when no one was watching, he stopped in front of the chalkboard in the main lecture hall. Because between 9 at night and 5 in the morning, Daniel wasn't the man in uniform nobody bothered to greet. In there, he was someone else entirely. It started 11 years earlier when his wife Rachel was still alive. She taught physics at a technical high school, the kind of teacher who stayed late for the one student nobody else wanted to deal with. On their second date in a coffee shop near campus, she sketched an equation on a napkin just to see how he'd react. Daniel solved it before their coffee arrived. Rachel looked at him for a long moment and said something he never forgot, that he saw numbers the way musicians hear notes. Rachel died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't warn you, doesn't give you time. She left behind a 7-year-old girl named Chloe and an old leather-bound notebook full of half-finished formulas and one problem. Just one that she never got to close. Since then, Daniel never stopped solving. It was his way of still hearing her voice. He'd work through a proof, erase it, then go back to mopping the hallway like nothing had happened. Nobody knew that the guard could do in 4 hours what graduate students couldn't manage in 5 weeks. Not until Victoria Hale arrived. Victoria came from Boston, a finished doctorate at 25, published in 3 international journals before she turned 30. They made her department chair the youngest in the university's history. Tailored suits, heels that clicked against the marble like a metronome, and a way of measuring people with her eyes that almost always found them lacking. She'd grown up on the North Shore, the daughter of a federal judge and a corporate attorney. Private school, a semester in Europe, a world where intelligence came with a zip code attached. In her world, people like Daniel carried the bags. They didn't solve theorems. In her first week as chair, Victoria announced a challenge in front of the entire academic council, a bottle of sparkling water in hand. An open problem in algebraic topology, $100,000 for whoever solved it. "This is going to separate the real thinkers from the tourists," she said. "I'll only accept submissions from doctoral candidates. Let's keep the bar where it belongs." Students threw themselves at it like a pack of wolves. Chalkboards filled up across the whole building, study groups running past midnight. 3 weeks. Nobody solved anything. Then one morning, Victoria walked into the main lecture hall and found something on the board. Handwriting she didn't recognize, careful, precise. 5 lines attacking the problem from an angle none of her students had even considered. Incomplete, but elegant. She stood there staring at it for almost a full minute, pulled the security footage, And there he was, a man in a Navy uniform, flashlight switched off on the table beside him, writing, pausing, writing again at 2 in the morning. Daniel Cole. The night guard. Victoria didn't see a brilliant mind. She saw a uniform. She printed a screenshot, carried it into the faculty lounge, and dropped it on the table like she was laying down an accusation. "We have a security guard," she said, "who thinks he's a mathematician." The professors laughed. One of them didn't. Frank Whitaker, 65 years old, white hair, 3 semesters from retirement. He picked up the photo, studied it, and said nothing. That afternoon, Victoria made a decision. She would bring Daniel into the lecture hall in front of his students, in front of everyone. Not to test him, to make an example of him. She wanted every person in that room to remember what happens when someone steps outside their place. What she hadn't accounted for was momentum. The email went out at 9:15 the next morning. Mandatory attendance. Main lecture hall, 10 o'clock, sharp. Dr. Hale will be speaking on academic integrity. Nobody knew what it was about, but when Victoria Hale called a meeting, people showed up. By 5 to 10, the hall was packed. 200 seats, students sitting on the stairs. 3 assistants standing by the door with their arms crossed. The chalkboard still held Daniel's handwriting, 5 lines of an unfinished proof. Victoria hadn't erased it. She wanted it visible. At 10 sharp, the side door opened. In walked Daniel, uniform flashlight in hand. Someone had told him there was a problem with the lighting. He had no idea 200 people were waiting for him. The murmurs started immediately. Victoria let them build. "Good morning, everyone," she said, arms crossed. "This is Daniel Cole. He takes care of this building. Makes sure the doors lock. Turns off the lights you people leave on." She paused. "And apparently he also does our homework." Laughter rippled through the hall. Daniel looked at the board, his handwriting, his work put on display like evidence. "Mr. Cole," Victoria said, walking toward him. "Did you write this?" Daniel nodded once. "With what kind of training exactly? A night school diploma or just a flashlight and a lot of free time?" More laughter. A student covered her mouth. Someone pulled out a phone to film. Daniel said nothing. His jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the flashlight until his knuckles went white. Victoria turned to the crowd. "This is what happens when boundaries get ignored, when someone confuses being near genius with actually having it." She pointed at the board. "Proximity to talent doesn't make you talented." She let the line settle. Then she walked to the board and tapped the unfinished proof. "But you know what? I'm feeling generous today." She uncapped a marker and wrote a new equation beneath his work, longer, denser, with a notation that made the graduate students in the front row lean in, squinting. "Solve it," she said, turning to face him. She looked him over, head to toe, the uniform, the damp shoes, the rough hands. "Solve it, and I'll marry you." The room exploded, students hugging each other, laughing. Someone at the back stood up. Phones everywhere. Victoria wore the smile of someone who already believed she'd won. Daniel looked at the equation. His eyes moved across it the way a pianist's fingers move before the first note, not reading, listening. He set the flashlight down on a chair, stepped up beside Victoria, close enough that she took a step back, picked up the chalk, started writing. The first line came out clean, certain, headed in a direction nobody in that room expected. Victoria's smile faded just slightly. By the 3rd line, the laughter had stopped. By the 5th, a graduate student in the front row leaned over and whispered to the person next to him, "He's right." Victoria uncrossed her arms. Daniel never looked at her, never looked at anyone. He kept writing, calm, unhurried, the chalk striking the board like a heartbeat. And for the first time in her career, Victoria Hale had no idea what was about to happen in her own classroom. The chalk moved in straight, measured lines, no hesitation, no pauses to think. Daniel wrote the way a man walks through his own house at night, from memory, by instinct, from years of doing it alone. The first 2 lines matched Victoria's original setup exactly. Same notation, same structure. A few students nodded, recognizing the path. Then on the third line, Daniel stopped. He circled a term in Victoria's own work, a substitution, the kind any professor makes without thinking twice, and the kind the whole room had copied into their notebooks without questioning it once. He crossed it out and rewrote it slowly, each symbol placed with care. Then he stepped back. Victoria frowned. "What are you doing?" Daniel pointed at the circled term. "This doesn't hold up. Sorry, the substitution in step 3 you assumed continuity at the limit, but the function has a removable discontinuity right there." He tapped the board gently. "And everything after this is built on that mistake, which means everything after it is wrong." Total silence. Victoria pressed her lips together. "That," she said slowly, "is a standard transformation. It's in every textbook." "It is," Daniel said. "And it works when the boundary conditions are symmetric. Yours aren't. You changed the domain in step 2 but kept the original limit. That breaks the substitution." He turned back and 3 lines below his correction wrote a clean reconstruction of the transformation, with the limit adjusted. The notation was tight, precise, clicking into place like a lock closing. A tall student in the front row, Ethan Cruz, who'd spent 2 weeks fighting this exact problem, pulled out his notebook and traced his copy of Victoria's setup with his finger. His eyes widened. "He's right," Ethan said, not loud enough. The student next to him leaned over, looked up. "He's right." It spread like a crack through glass. 2 more checked, then 5. The whole front row, flipping through notebooks, comparing notes, murmuring. Victoria hadn't moved. Daniel stood at the board, chalk in hand, waiting. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was just waiting the way someone waits after telling a truth nobody asked to hear. "Dr. Hale," Ethan said from his seat. "The discontinuity, I hit the exact same wall last week. Thought it was my mistake. It wasn't. It was the setup." Victoria turned to look at him. Her eyes had gone cold. "The setup is correct, Cruz. I published it." "You published it with symmetric limits," Daniel said quietly. "This problem doesn't have those." Silence. Victoria walked to the board, her heels striking the floor in short, deliberate steps. She stopped beside Daniel, close enough that the contrast between them was its own kind of exhibit. Tailored blazer next to a faded uniform, perfume next to the smell of bleach. She studied the corrections for 11 seconds, said nothing, then turned to face the room. "I left that error in on purpose," she said. Her voice held steady, but her left hand gripped the edge of the podium. "It was a test to see if any of you would catch it." Nobody believed her. Students glanced at each other. Ethan looked down at his notebook and closed it. An assistant near the back pressed his lips together and shook his head barely, but enough. Victoria turned back to Daniel. She looked at his hands, rough, dry, weathered from years of bleach and flashlights, looked at his faded uniform, fraying at the collar, looked at his face, calm, steady, easy to read. "You got lucky," she said. "One mistake doesn't make you a mathematician." Daniel nodded. "No, doctor, it doesn't." He set down the chalk, picked up his flashlight, and turned for the door. Before he reached it, a voice came from the back of the room. Frank Whitaker, 65 years old, white hair, hands still on his lap. He'd been sitting in the last row the whole time, watching. "Dr. Hale," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "For the record, I reviewed your published setup last spring, flagged that same discontinuity in my own notes, figured you'd fix it in revision." He paused. "You didn't." The room exhaled. Victoria's face went white, not with embarrassment, with fury. She looked at Frank like he'd betrayed her. He didn't flinch. He looked at Daniel instead, and for the first time, someone in that room looked at him without pity, without mockery, without confusion. Looked at him with recognition. Daniel walked out. The door closed behind him. The hallway was empty. His footsteps echoed against the marble. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. but his hands, for the first time in 11 years, weren't shaking, and inside 200 students sat staring at a chalkboard that had just been rewritten by the man who mopped it clean every single night. Victoria stood alone at the front of the room. Her corrections still marked in chalk, her authority cracked wide open in public, and the real equation, the impossible one, still sitting there unsolved, waiting. That night, Victoria didn't sleep. She stayed in her third-floor office 2 floors above the same building where Daniel was mopping, replaying the scene over and over. The marked error, the silence, Frank's voice from the back row, Ethan's face when he said he's right. A guard had corrected her. In public. By morning, the story had already made its way across campus. Someone had posted it, no names, just the caption. The head of the math department got corrected by the security guard, and he said it was on purpose. 400 shares before noon. Victoria's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She deleted every message. At 2 that afternoon, she called a meeting with the university president, Dr. Alan Franco, a man in his 60s who'd run the school for 12 years and preferred problems that solved themselves quietly. I want to formalize the challenge, Victoria said. Franco raised an eyebrow. Formalize what, exactly? The open problem, the one from the board. I want to give the guard a formal deadline, 2 weeks. Either he solves the full equation in front of the academic council, or his contract gets terminated for misuse of university property. Franco leaned back in his chair. Correcting a substitution isn't a crime. He accessed restricted research material, handled department property, presented himself as something he isn't by writing on an institutional chalkboard. Victoria's fingers dug into the arm of her chair. If we let this slide, we set a precedent. Anybody off the street gets to call themselves a professor. Franco studied her for a long moment, then sighed. 2 weeks, he said. But if he solves it, the prize is his. Same terms as any other contestant. And Victoria, this stays academic, no spectacle. Victoria agreed. She had no intention of keeping that promise. The next day, Daniel found a formal letter in his locker, university letterhead. 2 paragraphs. He was invited, the word doing all the work, to present a complete solution to the open problem in front of the council within 14 days. If verified, he'd receive the $100,000 prize. If he failed or refused, his contract would go under review for misuse of university resources. Daniel read it twice, folded it, and slid it into his back pocket. That night at the kitchen table, while Chloe worked on her homework, and a bowl of soup went cold on the stove, the letter sat between them. Dad, what's that? A math problem. Looks hard. Daniel looked at her. 7 years old, Rachel's eyes, Rachel's stubbornness. Yeah, baby, it's really hard. Harder than Mom's? He almost smiled. Maybe. Chloe went back to her long division, the kind with remainders. Mom used to say hard problems just mean you need more paper. Daniel folded the letter again and put it away. He wasn't doing this for the money. He wasn't doing it to prove anything to Victoria. He was doing it because Rachel had written that exact same equation, the same one on the last page of her notebook. She'd been working it when she got sick. She never finished it. He was going to finish it for her. By the next morning, the student paper had run it on the front page. Department chair challenges security guard to solve 30-year-old math problem. The article ran Daniel's badge photo, grainy and serious, next to Victoria's official portrait, polished and sure. The comments filled up within hours. Some called it inspiring, some called it a stunt, some called it cruel. A betting pool popped up on a student forum, 15-1 against Daniel. What nobody knew, not even Victoria, was that the equation she'd published wasn't just difficult. It was a variant of the Ashworth-Kellerman conjecture, an open problem that had defeated every mathematician who'd come near it for 30 years. Victoria had chosen it on purpose. She'd picked the one problem she was absolutely certain no one could solve, least of all a security guard. And that same night, in his apartment, Daniel opened Rachel's leather notebook to its final page. Her handwriting small, careful, sure, filled the margins. She had gotten closer than anyone ever knew. He picked up a pencil, the same kind Rachel used to use, yellow eraser, worn down, and started where she'd left off. Day 1. Daniel finished his shift at 5 in the morning, drove home, kissed Chloe's forehead while she slept, and sat down at the table. He opened the notebook to the last page. Arrows, crossed out terms, question marks, a little smiley face beside a partial breakthrough she must have been proud of. He studied her approach for 2 hours. Rachel had been working the Ashworth-Kellerman conjecture without even knowing its formal name. She'd found it in a library book and copied it down the way you copy a poem you can't stop thinking about. Her approach was unconventional. It didn't follow the standard path through algebraic topology. It came in sideways from combinatorics, unexpected, almost naive, and it had gone further than most published mathematicians ever managed. She'd stopped at step 4. A note in the margin read, "Need access to the research archive. Ask D to check." Daniel never got the chance to ask. She got sick 3 weeks later. He closed the notebook, picked up his pencil, and began. Day 3. The first 3 steps came fast. Daniel had worked similar structures on that chalkboard for years, not this exact problem, but ones close enough. His hands knew the notation the way a carpenter's hands know a joint. He wrote on scrap paper pulled from the recycling bin at work, both sides, every margin. By midnight, he had 40 pages stacked on the table. Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch, her homework folder open on her chest. Daniel carried her to bed, tucked her in, went back to the table. Step 4. This was where Rachel had stopped, where everyone stopped. The transformation demanded a bridge between 2 branches of mathematics that normally didn't speak to each other, topology and number theory. Every published attempt forced the connection through brute calculation. Every one of them failed. Daniel tried the same thing. 6 hours, 20 pages, the same wall every time. He crumpled the pages and threw them in the trash. Day 5. Frank Whitaker found Daniel in the maintenance closet sitting on an overturned bucket writing on the back of a cardboard box. "You're working on it?" Frank said, not a question. Daniel looked up. "Shouldn't you stay away from me? They'll say you're helping." Frank leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not here to help. I'm here to tell you something." He paused. 22 years ago, I took a run at this same conjecture. 14 months of my life. Published a partial result. Got cited 11 times. Never solved it. He looked at the cardboard box. Failed at step 4. Same place everybody fails. The bridge between topology and number theory. I tried every known method. He looked again. Never tried it from combinatorics, though. Daniel said nothing. I saw your work on that board. Years of it. You don't think like the rest of us. You don't build from the roof down, you build from the ground up, Frank straightened. Might be exactly what this problem needs. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photocopy of 1997 research paper, a minor result in combinatorial topology, cited exactly twice in 30 years. This won't solve step 4 for you, Frank said, but it might show you the door. He set it on the shelf next to the bleach bottles and left. Day 8. Daniel read the paper 7 times. The result was narrow, almost trivial, isolated, but something in it connected to Rachel's approach. A lemma about boundary conditions in discrete spaces, not a solution, a key. He sat down at the table at 3 in the morning. Chloe's drawings were taped to the fridge behind him, a crayon sun, a stick figure family, 2 tall and 1 small. The third figure had wings. Daniel wrote, crossed out, wrote again. For 4 hours he circled the same idea, trying to pin it down. The connection was there, he could feel it, but it kept slipping away. At 7:15, Chloe wandered into the kitchen in her pajamas. Dad, did you sleep? Not yet. She looked at the pages scattered across the table, numbers and symbols she didn't understand. She picked one up, turned it sideways, squinted. "This one looks like a butterfly," she said, pointing at an integral sign. Daniel laughed, first time in 8 days. "Your mom used to say the same thing. She called them butterflies too." Chloe set the page down carefully like it mattered. "Are you going to finish Mom's problem?" "I'm trying. She'd want you to finish it." Daniel looked at his daughter. 7 years old already, carrying things no kid should have to carry. "Yeah," he said, "she would." Day 10. Victoria hadn't been sitting still. She'd been watching from her office, asking security about Daniel's movements, questioning whether Frank had been seen near the maintenance closet. She found nothing solid, but she found something else. A colleague in the registrar's office pulled Daniel's personnel file at Victoria's request. High school diploma, no college, no certifications, hired at 26. Emergency contact, Rachel Cole, deceased. One dependent, Chloe Cole, age 7. Victoria stared at the file. For a moment, just a moment, something shifted behind her eyes, something that might have been doubt or might have been guilt. She closed the file, opened her email, and began drafting a message to the academic council. Subject line, academic integrity concerns, Cole case. Day 11. Daniel's body was starting to fail him. 4 hours of sleep across 3 days. His hands shook when he held the pencil. His vision blurred at the edges. At work, he knocked over a bucket of water in the second-floor hallway and stood there frozen, watching it spread across the floor for 30 seconds. A coworker asked if he was okay. Daniel nodded, picked up the bucket, kept mopping. That night he fell asleep at the table, his face resting against a page of equations. When Chloe found him in the morning, she draped a blanket over his shoulders and poured herself a bowl of cereal. Then she left a note beside his hand, written in purple crayon. "You can do it, Dad. Love, Chloe." Day 12. 2 days left. Daniel had covered the maintenance closet walls with equations, pages taped to every surface, shelves the door inside his locker. The closet looked like a mathematician's office turned upside down. He was close. He could feel it. Step 4 wasn't a wall anymore, it was a door left slightly open. Light was getting through, just not enough to walk through yet. He needed one more piece, one more connection, and it was somewhere in Rachel's notebook, he was sure of it. Something she'd written without knowing it mattered, a note in the margin, a stray calculation, an accidental butterfly. He hadn't found it yet, and the clock kept running. Day 13, 1 day before the deadline. Victoria sent the email at 6 in the morning. It went to the entire academic council, the university president and the head of campus security. Subject line, urgent evidence of academic fraud, Cole case. She attached 3 things. First, a security still from day 5, Frank Whitaker entering Daniel's supply closet, time-stamped. Second, a photograph of Daniel's locker taken by a maintenance supervisor Victoria had asked to check it for safety. Inside, behind a bottle of bleach, the 1997 paper Frank had given him with handwritten notes in the margin. Third, a side-by-side comparison, Daniel's cardboard boxwork next to a section of Frank's own partial result published 22 years earlier. Victoria had circled the matching annotation in red. Her email ran 4 lines. Professor Whitaker has been leaking restricted research material to an unqualified employee. The attached evidence shows clear overlap between Whitaker's published work and Cole's notes. This constitutes academic fraud. I recommend immediate suspension of both parties pending investigation. By 9, the council had already convened. By 10:30, 2 security officers arrived at Daniel's closet. They asked him to step out. Photographed every wall, every taped page. Sealed the door with yellow tape. Daniel stood in the hallway and watched them work. Said nothing. His pages, 12 days of work. Rachel's approach spread across 40 sheets now labeled as evidence. At noon, Frank was called into the president's office. He walked out 15 minutes later, suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending review. Frank found Daniel sitting on a bench outside the building. The old man sat down beside him. Neither spoke for a while. "I'm sorry," Daniel finally said. "Don't be." Frank looked up at the building. "She's scared. That's what this whole thing is about. She picked the one problem she thought was impossible, and you're solving it. That terrifies her more than any mistake on a chalkboard ever could." Daniel looked down at his hands. "They took my pages." "Do you remember them?" "Most of them," Frank nodded. "Then they took nothing." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked down. "You've got 1 day. No closet, no archive, no help." He paused. "But you have something none of the rest of us ever had." "What's that?" "Rachel's notebook." Frank crossed the courtyard, his footsteps fading down the stone path. Daniel sat alone on the bench, the math building in front of him, locked, lit, off limits. Tomorrow was the deadline, and he'd just lost everything except a leather notebook and a pencil. The story hit the local news that same afternoon. "Security guard accused of academic fraud." The headline used the same grainy badge photo. Below it, a quote from an anonymous faculty source: "He never belonged near that chalkboard in the first place." By the next morning, it was everywhere: social media, teacher forums, student group chats. The narrative had already written itself. A guard caught faking it, a fraud, a joke that went too far. Daniel's phone rang 6 times before noon. He didn't answer. He stayed home, blinds shut, Rachel's notebook open on the table. The pages blurred in front of him. He couldn't focus. At 3:15, Chloe got home from school. She didn't say hello. She walked in, dropped her backpack, and stood in the middle of the kitchen, eyes red, lip trembling. "Dad?" Daniel looked up. "What happened?" "Jason said you're a cheater." Her voice cracked. "He showed everybody an article on his mom's phone at recess in front of everyone." Daniel's chest tightened. "He said you stole someone's homework." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "He said guards don't know math." "What else did he say, sweetheart?" "He said Mom probably didn't know it either." Daniel didn't move. His fingers flattened against the table, his jaw tight. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the house was the refrigerator humming. He pulled her in. Chloe buried her face in his chest, her small hands gripping his shirt. "Your mom," he said quietly, "was the smartest person I ever knew in my whole life." "Then why do they say that?" "Because they don't know her. And they don't know us." He held her until the shaking stopped, then made dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, Rachel's recipe for hard days. Chloe ate in silence and went to bed early without being asked. Daniel sat alone at the table. The notebook was still open. Rachel's handwriting looked back at him from the page, the last sheet, the unfinished problem. Her final note in the margin: "Almost there. Try flipping the limit. Mirror image." He'd read that note 100 times, never understood what it meant. Until now. Mirror image. It wasn't about the boundary conditions of the equation, it was about the entire approach. Every mathematician, every single one, including Frank, had tried to build the bridge from topology toward number theory, left to right. That was the convention. That was the training. Rachel was suggesting the opposite. Build from number theory toward topology, right to left, flip the whole direction of the proof. It was so simple it had been invisible. Daniel picked up his pencil. His hands, for the first time in days, were steady. He started with a basic identity from number theory, something any second semester student would recognize. He extended it, generalized it, then mapped it onto the topological framework without forcing a single bridge, letting the structure reveal itself on its own. Line by line, the proof opened up. Step 4, the same step that had stopped everyone for 30 years, unfolded across 11 lines. Daniel set the pencil down at 3:13 in the morning. He stared at the page, read it again, and again. It held. He leaned back in his chair. The apartment was dark, Chloe was asleep, the crayon note still sat on the table. "You can do it, Dad." He looked at Rachel's notebook, placed his hand on the cover, and left it there for a moment. "I found it," he whispered. "Found your butterfly." He closed the notebook. Tomorrow was the deadline. No closet, no archive, no chalkboard of his own, no allies. But he had the complete proof written on the backs of his daughter's coloring pages, and he was about to walk into that lecture hall and put it on the board. The hall was full by 8:30 in the morning. The presentation was set for 9. Word had spread far beyond the math department. Students from other colleges packed the upper rows. 2 local news crews set up cameras in the back. A reporter from the state paper sat in the 3rd row with a notepad. Someone was live streaming from their phone. The viewer count had already passed 1,000. The academic council sat in the front row, 5 professors, spines straight, folders open. President Franco, reading glasses halfway down his nose. Beside him, Dr. Simone Rosales, the associate dean who had pushed hardest to give Daniel this chance in the first place. Center front row, Victoria Hale. Tailored suit heels not a hair out of place. Her face composed, but her fingers turned a pen over and over in her lap. Frank Whitaker wasn't in the front row. He sat in the back, arms crossed, watching. At 8:58, the side door opened. In walked Daniel Cole. The same faded uniform, the same rough hands, the same steady face. But something was different. He walked with his spine straight, his eyes clear, carrying nothing but a folded sheet of paper tucked in his shirt pocket. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone understands the same thing at the same moment. This is really happening. Daniel walked to the front. He didn't look at Victoria, didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the chalkboard, the same one he'd wiped clean every night for 11 years. The same one where Victoria had laughed and said, "Solve it and I'll marry you." He picked up the chalk and began. The first 3 steps were familiar, clean, efficient. The same approach he'd shown 2 weeks earlier, the combinatorial framework Rachel had started. The council followed along, some of them nodding. Ethan Cruz in the 4th row leaned forward, notebook open. The second step built on the first with a generalization that widened the scope of the proof. Daniel wrote without stopping, each line connected to the next, like links in a chain. No gaps, no leaps of faith, just logic laid bare. The third step introduced the topological mapping. This was where most published attempts began and where most of them ended. Daniel's version was different. He didn't force topology onto the problem, he let the combinatorial structure suggest it. The mapping emerged naturally, like a pattern surfacing on water once it settles. One of the council members, Dr. Renata Iturbide, a topologist with 30 years of experience, uncrossed her arms and tilted her head. She was watching something she'd never seen before. Then Daniel reached step 4. He stopped, stood still for 3 seconds. The room held its breath. He pulled the folded page from his pocket, opened it, looked at it once. Rachel's handwriting. Her note in the margin, her little smiley face. Then he folded it and put it away. He didn't need it. He already knew it by heart. He turned back to the board and wrote the number theory identity, the basic result any undergraduate would recognize. He extended it, generalized it, and then did what no one in 30 years had done. He built the bridge from the other side. Instead of forcing number theory to speak the language of topology, he let topology speak the language of number theory. Right to left, the mirror image, Rachel's idea, written in a notebook, never published, never peer-reviewed, never seen by anyone except the guard who loved her. The proof unfolded across 11 lines, each one tighter than the last, each one inevitable, the kind of mathematics that once you see it, you can't believe nobody saw it before. The room stayed silent. Not the silence of boredom, the silence of people witnessing something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Ethan's pen had stopped moving. He was staring at the board, mouth open. Dr. Iturbide leaned so far forward her chair creaked. A graduate student 3 rows back whispered to no one in particular, "This isn't possible." Daniel wrote the final line. A clean equality. The conjecture solved, complete. 30 years of failure closed out in 41 minutes by a man in a security guard's uniform. He set down the chalk. The sound of it hitting the metal tray echoed through the silence. Daniel turned and faced the room. 200 faces staring back at him. Cameras rolling, phones raised. The live stream counter had passed 40,000 viewers. Nobody clapped. Not yet. The silence was too full, too heavy. Dr. Iturbide spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It holds." She looked at the council, then at the board, then back at Daniel. "Every line, every step, it holds." President Franco removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, stared at the board for a long moment, then looked at Daniel. The uniform, the calloused hands, the chalk dust on his fingers. "Mr. Cole," he said. "Where did you study?" "Nowhere, sir. My wife taught me," the room exhaled. Someone in the fifth row covered her mouth with her hand. Then Ethan started clapping, slow, deliberate. 1, then 2, then 10. Then the whole hall on its feet. The sound crashed against the walls like a wave. Students stomped the floor. A camera swung toward the crowd. The live stream chat exploded, thousands of messages scrolling too fast to read. Daniel stood in front of the board. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his hands. He looked down at the chalk dust on his fingers, the same fingers that an hour earlier had been holding a flashlight. Victoria Hale hadn't moved. Front row, her pen had slipped to the floor. Her eyes were fixed on the board, on the proof, on the handwriting, on the clean, undeniable logic of the whole thing. She wasn't looking at a guard anymore. She was looking at the proof, and for the first time, at the man who'd written it. The man who'd learned from his dying wife's notebook. The man who solved equations alone at 2 a.m. and erased them before sunrise. The man she'd humiliated in this exact room in front of these exact people 14 days earlier. Her eyes were wet. Her hands were still. The pen stayed on the floor and she made no move to pick it up. A professor 2 seats down leaned toward her and murmured, "Not quiet enough. So when's the wedding?" Victoria didn't answer, didn't laugh, didn't deflect. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time he looked back. The video hit the internet before Daniel even left the building. A student had recorded the entire 41-minute presentation, a security guard solving a 30-year-old math problem on a chalkboard. But the clip that went viral wasn't the proof. It was the first 15 seconds from 2 weeks earlier. Victoria Hale grabbing a guard by the arm, pulling him from the board, laughing, then chin raised, arms crossed, "Solve it and I'll marry you." Cut to the same 2 people at the same board, Daniel setting down the chalk after finishing the proof. The standing ovation. Victoria in tears. The clip hit 4 million views in 6 hours. By midnight, 40 million. Hashtag the guard who silenced her. It trended in 23 countries. The comments rolled in waves. "She owes him a ring. This is the greatest math love story I've ever seen." He didn't just solve the equation, he solved her. The news picked it up, national networks, international outlets. The headlines changed, but the story stayed the same. A guard, a professor, an impossible equation, and the promise made out of cruelty. Victoria's inbox filled with interview requests. Her phone rang every 3 minutes. The university released a neutral, carefully worded statement that managed to say nothing at all. But Victoria didn't hide. 2 days after the presentation, she drove to Daniel's apartment, parked on the street, sat in the car for 11 minutes before knocking. Daniel opened the door. Chloe stood behind him, crayons still in her hand. Victoria looked at him. Not the uniform, not the rough hands. Him. "I said it as an insult," she said. "I wanted to humiliate you. I wanted to prove you didn't belong in my world." She paused, her voice steady, her hands not. "But you do belong. You always did, and I was too arrogant to see it." She looked down, then back up. "I meant it, Daniel. I just didn't know it yet." Daniel said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside and held the door open. Chloe tugged his shirt. "Dad, who's that?" Daniel looked at Victoria. Something in his face, something that had been closed off for 5 years, shifted. Someone who's learning, he said. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at Daniel's apartment. Letterhead from the Holloway Institute of Technology. 2 paragraphs. A full doctoral scholarship, tuition, housing, living expenses all covered. The admissions committee had reviewed the proof and called it the most elegant resolution of a long-standing conjecture in combinatorial topology in over a decade. They wanted Daniel Cole not as a visitor, not as a curiosity, as a student, as a colleague, as a mathematician. Daniel read the letter at the kitchen table. Chloe ate cereal across from him. "Dad, what's that?" "A school wants me to come study math. Is it far?" "A little." "Can I come?" He smiled. "You're coming." Victoria resigned as department chair that same week. No public statement, no fight. She handed the president a 1-page letter and cleared out her office that afternoon. She kept exactly one thing, the printed security still of Daniel at the board at 2 in the morning. She hung it above her desk at home, not as a trophy, as a reminder. The ceremony was held in the same main lecture hall, 1 floor above the room where it all began. The president handed Daniel the award, the $100,000, his name on the check. Daniel stood at the podium in his faded blue uniform. They'd offered him a suit. He turned it down. The hall was packed. Faculty, students, 3 news cameras. Frank Whitaker sat in the front row this time, exactly where he belonged. Chloe sat beside him, and next to Chloe Victoria, the 3 of them in 1 row, the old professor, the little girl, and the woman who was learning how to see. Daniel looked out at the crowd. He held the podium with the same rough hands that had once held a flashlight, a pencil, a piece of chalk. "I'm just a guard," he said, "who always believed the numbers don't lie." He looked at Chloe. She waved. He looked at Victoria. She nodded. He stepped down from the podium. Chloe took one hand. Victoria took the other. They walked out together. The equation on the board had already been solved, but the proof that really mattered, the one that counted, was walking out the door. If anyone ever tells you that you don't belong, stay anyway. Solve it, and let them watch.